My sister got the cars, the trips, and the praise, while I was the invisible spare part. When my mother demanded I fund my sister's lifestyle brand at Grandma's birthday, I casually mentioned my new Manhattan penthouse. The wine flew, and the family shattered. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. I was lying in the dark, the cool compress on my forehead doing absolutely nothing to dull the pounding migraine that had set up camp behind my eyes. It wasn't just a headache. It was the cumulative physical crash of working 80-hour weeks for 3 years straight. My body felt like it was made of lead, vibrating with that specific kind of exhaustion that comes when the adrenaline finally leaves your system. I stared at the ceiling of my studio apartment, a cramped, functional box in Queens with peeling linoleum and a radiator that hissed like a dying cat. It was the place I had lived in since I was 22. To anyone looking in, this apartment screamed struggle. It screamed paycheck to paycheck. It was the visual definition of mediocrity. But that was the point, that was the armor. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the vibration rattling against the cheap particle board. I groaned, rolling over to check the screen. The brightness seared my eyes, but I made out the name, Mom. A tiny, foolish spark of hope flared in my chest. I had sent her a text 3 days ago telling her I was undergoing testing for a heart arrhythmia, a direct result of stress and caffeine overdose. Maybe, just maybe, she was calling to check if I was okay. Maybe she was calling to see if her eldest daughter was still alive. I cleared my throat, trying to sound less like a corpse. Hello. Rebecca, thank God you picked up. Martha's voice came through, but it wasn't laced with concern. It was breathless, frantic, and entirely self-centered. We have a crisis. A complete disaster. I sat up slowly, clutching the compress. What's wrong? Is Dad okay? Is Grandma? No, it's Evelyn, she interrupted, the name landing like a slap. She's in absolute hysterics. The venue for her launch party double-booked, and they're refusing to refund the deposit immediately. She needs $5,000, Rebecca, right now, today. The room went silent, save for the hissing radiator. My heart did a painful stutter step. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice trembling not with fear, but with a sudden, rising bile. I sent you a message on Tuesday. I'm sick, Mom. I've been at the cardiologist. There was a pause on the other end, a beat of silence that stretched just long enough to be cruel. Well, you answered the phone, didn't you? Martha snapped, her tone shifting from frantic to annoyed. Look, I don't have time for your melodramatics. Evelyn is crying her eyes out. This launch is her dream. We've tapped out our credit cards for the catering, and your father is stressed enough as it is. We need you to wire the money. We know you have that savings account you hoard like a dragon. That savings account, I said, my voice hardening, is for emergencies, my emergencies, not Evelyn's party. Family is an emergency, she shrieked. Don't be selfish. You always do this. You sit in that depressing little apartment, hoarding your pennies while your sister tries to build a life. Just send the money. We'll pay you back when her brand takes off. Like you paid me back for her car, I asked. Like you paid me back for her bail. I am not debating this with you, Martha said, her voice turning icy. If you don't help your sister, don't bother showing up to Grandma's 80th on Saturday. We don't need that kind of negative energy around us. Evelyn is fragile right now. She hung up. I stared at the phone, the disconnect tone humming in my ear. The betrayal wasn't the money. It never was. It was the fact that while I was lying here, terrified that my heart was failing from overwork, my mother didn't even hear me. She didn't care if I lived or died, as long as I signed the check before I expired. But as the tears finally welled up, hot and stinging, I looked across the room. Sitting on top of a stack of unread mail was a thick, cream-colored envelope made of heavy cardstock. It was a deed I had signed just 4 hours before the migraine hit. They thought I was broke. They thought I was selfish. They thought they could bully me because I had nothing else. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It carved a hollow space in my chest where my love for them used to be. But as I looked at that envelope, the tears stopped. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. If they wanted to talk about money, we could talk about money. The next 48 hours were a blur of cold calculation. I didn't call Martha back. I didn't transfer the $5,000. I simply turned off my phone, took my medication, and slept. When I finally woke up on Friday morning, the migraine had receded to a dull throb at the base of my skull. I felt lighter, somehow. The emotional tether that had bound me to their approval for 29 years had snapped during that phone call. It was a violent severance, but now that it was gone, I realized how heavy it had been. I got out of bed and walked to my kitchenette. It was tiny, you could touch the fridge and the stove at the same time, but it was clean. I made coffee, the ritual soothing me. As I drank, I looked around the apartment with new eyes. To my parents, this place was proof of my failure. They saw the peeling paint and the second-hand furniture and assumed I was barely keeping my head above water. They assumed that my job as a data analyst, the vague title I gave them years ago, was some low-level clerical position paying 40 grand a year. They never asked for details. They never asked about the markets. They never asked what quantitative analysis actually meant. If they had, they might have learned that I wasn't just inputting data into spreadsheets. They might have learned that I built algorithms for a high-frequency trading firm that managed billions in assets. They might have learned that my performance bonuses alone could buy their house 3 times over. But they never asked. They only saw what they wanted to see. Rebecca, the boring, frugal, struggling spinster. A sharp knock at the door broke my reverie. It was a distinctive knock, 3 rapid raps, a pause, and then 3 more. My stomach tightened. I opened the door to find Martha standing in the hallway, looking out of place in her pastel suburban cardigan against the grime of my hallway. She didn't say hello. She just breezed past me, wrinkling her nose at the smell of the neighbor's curry. "You didn't answer your phone," she accused, not even looking at me as she scanned the apartment, her eyes landing critically on my worn-out sofa. "Evelyn has been a wreck. We had to cancel the chocolate fountain because of you." "Hello to you too, Mother," I said, leaning against the doorframe, refusing to close it. "I told you I was sick." "You look fine," she dismissed, waving a hand at me. "You look the same as always, tired and pale. Maybe if you bought some decent makeup or got out more, you wouldn't feel so sick all the time. Evelyn uses this wonderful collagen supplement. I should get you some." She finally turned to face me, her expression tightening. "Did you bring the check for tomorrow?" "For Grandma's birthday," I asked, feigning ignorance. "No, for Evelyn's business. For the launch," Martha stomped her foot, a gesture that looked ridiculous on a 55-year-old woman. "We are combining the events. Grandma's 80th is going to double as the launch party for Evie's Essence. It's synergy, Rebecca. Evelyn explains it much better than I do." I stared at her. "You're hijacking Grandma's 80th birthday for Evelyn's influencer brand." "Grandma doesn't mind," Martha sniffed, picking at a loose thread on my armchair. "She wants Evelyn to succeed, unlike some people. Anyway, since you refuse to wire the money, we expect you to hand over a check tomorrow. Consider it your gift to the family. 5,000. Don't embarrass us by showing up empty-handed." She moved to the door, pausing to look me up and down. Her gaze was filled with a mixture of pity and disdain. "And please, wear something nice, not this gray shapeless thing you always wear. Evelyn has invited some very high-profile people. Influencers, brand managers. Try not to look like her poor relation." "I'll do my best," I said, my voice flat. "Good," she stepped out into the hallway. 2:00 p.m., don't be late." I watched her walk away, her heels clicking on the linoleum. She hadn't asked about my heart. She hadn't asked about my job. She hadn't even asked for a glass of water. She just came to collect. I closed the door and locked it. I walked back to the table and picked up the deed to the penthouse. It was a duplex in Tribeca, floor-to-ceiling windows, private terrace. It had cost me $6.5 million paid in cash. My mother thought I was the poor relation. She thought I was the failure. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I was the one who balanced the books. And tomorrow, the audit was due. To understand why I let it go on this long, you have to understand the dynamic. It wasn't just that they loved Evelyn more. It was that they had invested their entire identity into her success. Since we were kids, Evelyn was the spark. She was pretty, bubbly, and demanding. I was quiet, bookish, and independent. When we were teenagers, my parents refinanced their house to pay for Evelyn's modeling classes that went nowhere. When I got into a top-tier university on a full academic scholarship, they didn't celebrate, they were. Just relieved they didn't have to pay for me, so they could buy Evelyn a convertible for her high school graduation. I worked 3 jobs in college. I sent them money when Dad got laid off. I paid for the new roof on their house 2 years ago, an anonymous gift because Mom said it would hurt Dad's pride to take money from his daughter, though they had no issue taking it from Evelyn's non-existent income, which was actually just recycled money from them. I had been the safety net, the invisible foundation they walked on to lift Evelyn up to the stars. Saturday arrived with a bright, harsh sun. I dressed carefully. Usually, I dressed down around them to avoid questions, wearing comfortable slacks and generic sweaters. Today, I chose differently. I put on a tailored black jumpsuit. It looked simple to the untrained eye, but it was structured silk wool from a designer whose name my mother wouldn't recognize, but the high-profile guests might. I wore the diamond studs I had bought myself for my 28th birthday, 2 carats each, flawless. I grabbed my clutch, checked that the deed and the photos on my phone were ready, and headed out. The party was at a rented event hall in the suburbs, a place with faux crystal chandeliers and carpet that smelled of stale beer and floral cleaner. When I walked in, the disparity was immediate. One corner of the room had a small table with a generic sheet cake that said, "Happy 80th Grandma." The entire rest of the room was a shrine to Evelyn. There were banners that screamed EVIES Essence. There were displays of generic-looking essential oils and crystals. There was a ring light set up in the center of the dance floor, and there was Evelyn. She was holding court near the bar, wearing a shimmering gold gown that was far too formal for a daytime event. She looked stunning, I'll give her that. Her hair was extensions, her tan was spray-on, and her teeth were veneered, all paid for by the credit cards my father was drowning in. I walked over to Grandma first. She was sitting in a wheelchair in the corner, looking overwhelmed. "Hi, Grandma," I said softly, kissing her cheek. She looked up, her eyes cloudy. "Rebecca, oh, you came, I thought. Martha said you were too busy with your typing job." "I'm here, Grandma. Happy birthday." "It's a bit loud," she whispered, clutching her purse. "Evelyn needs the music for her video." I squeezed her hand, a surge of protective anger rising in my throat. They had shoved the birthday girl into a corner at her own party. Well, look who finally decided to show up. I turned. Evelyn was standing there, a glass of champagne in one hand, her phone in the other. She was recording herself. "Hey guys," she chirped to her phone screen. "This is my big sister, Rebecca. She works in data entry. She's super serious." She turned the camera off and her smile instantly dropped. "You're late," she hissed. "And what are you wearing? It looks like a waiter's uniform." "Happy birthday, Grandma," I said to Evelyn, ignoring her comment. "It is Grandma's party, right?" Evelyn rolled her eyes. "Don't be petty. Grandma wants me to succeed. Did you bring the check? Mom said you were bringing the check." "I brought a gift for Grandma," I said, patting my clutch. Evelyn stepped closer, invading my personal space. The scent of expensive perfume, another gift from Mom, was overpowering. "Listen to me, Becky," she lowered her voice, her eyes narrowing. She wasn't the bubbly influencer now, she was the shark. "I have investors coming here today, real people. I need that money to show liquidity. If you ruin this for me, if you embarrass me in front of them by being your usual sour, stingy self, I will make sure Mom and Dad never speak to you again. You're already on thin ice." She looked at me with total contempt, scanning my face, my hair, my waiter outfit. "You have no idea what it takes to build a brand," she sneered. "You just sit in a cubicle and type numbers. You have no vision, you have no legacy. You're just background noise. So be a good little sister, write the check and go sit with Grandma. Let the stars handle the room." She turned on her heel and walked away, snapping her fingers at a waiter. I watched her go. I felt the familiar burn of humiliation, the old instinct to shrink away and apologize. But then I felt the weight of the paper in my bag. "Background noise," I repeated softly to myself. I looked over at Uncle Rob, my dad's brother. He was standing by the buffet, looking grim, nursing a beer. He caught my eye and gave a subtle nod, his expression saying, "Can you believe this circus?" I nodded back. The time for being invisible was over. I watched Evelyn glide away, her golden dress shimmering under the harsh ballroom lights, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and condescension in her wake. My hand was still clutching my bag, the sharp corner of the deed digging into my palm through the leather. It was a grounding sensation, a physical reminder of the reality I lived in versus the delusion they were drowning in. I needed air. The suffocating mix of floral cleaner and hypocrisy was making my heart palpitate again, a jagged, uneasy rhythm that reminded me I wasn't just fighting them. I was fighting my own physical limits. I stepped away from the main cluster of guests, moving toward the buffet table where Uncle Rob was still nursing his beer. He was my father's older brother, a retired contractor with hands like sandpaper and a tolerance for nonsense that had evaporated somewhere in the late 90s. He was the only person in the family who didn't look at Evelyn like she was the second coming of Christ. "You look like you're plotting a murder, Becca," Rob grunted as I approached, not looking up from the tray of stale pigs in a blanket. "Just plotting an exit strategy," I muttered, picking up a glass of water. "How are you holding up?" Rob took a long pull of his beer, his eyes scanning the room. He watched my father, who was frantically swiping a credit card at the mobile bar terminal, looking sweaty and pale. "I've been better," Rob said, his voice dropping to a rumble. "Your dad asked me for $5,000 yesterday." I froze, the glass halfway to my mouth. "He asked you for money." "Said it was for a short-term liquidity issue," Rob scoffed, using air quotes with a grimace. "I told him to kick rocks. I know a hole in the ground when I see one. But Becca, it's worse than you think." I turned to face him fully, my analytical brain kicking into gear. "Define worse." Rob leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "I have a buddy down at the county clerk's office. I was looking into some zoning stuff for my place, and I got curious. Your parents took out a second mortgage on the house 3 months ago, a big one, high interest, short term." The room seemed to tilt slightly. A second mortgage. Their house was the only asset they had left. They were in their late 50s. If they defaulted, they wouldn't just be broke, they would be homeless. "They told me the business was taking off," I said, my voice hollow. "Mom said Evelyn had pre-sales. She said investors were lining up." "There are no investors, kid," Rob said, shaking his head. "Look around. Who's here? It's family, a few of Evelyn's bewildered high school friends, and a bunch of influencers she probably paid to show up. The only investors in Evie's essence are your parents' retirement fund and that house." I looked back at my father. He was arguing with the bartender now, his face a mask of panic. He wasn't stressed because of the party planning. He was stressed because he was financially bleeding out. I pulled out my phone. I didn't just take Rob's word for it, I verified. That was my job. I logged into the public property records portal for Queens. It took me 30 seconds to find the lien. There it was, recorded 90 days ago. A loan for $150,000 against the equity of their home. I scrolled further. I checked the business registry for Evie's Essence. It wasn't even an LLC. It was a sole proprietorship registered to my mother's name. Evelyn didn't even have the liability, my mother did. The puzzle pieces slammed together. The crisis with the venue deposit wasn't a banking error. They were tapped out. They had burned through 150 grand in 3 months on inventory, branding, and this ridiculous party, and now they were looking at me to keep the lights on. I wasn't the safety net anymore. I was the bailout package. They're going to lose the house, I whispered. If they haven't already, Rob said grimly, and let me guess, they want you to write a check today. 5,000, I said. Don't do it, Becca, Rob said, his eyes locking onto mine. It's like throwing a stake into a woodchipper. It's gone the second it leaves your hand. You keep your money, you built your life. Don't let them drag you down into the crater. I looked at the deed in my bag again. I had spent 6 years eating ramen, working 80-hour weeks, missing holidays, and destroying my health to build a fortress of security. I had bought that penthouse not just for the view, but because it was something mine. Something they couldn't touch. I'm not giving them a cent, I said, the resolve hardening in my chest like concrete. Good, Rob said, but brace yourself, the show's starting. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight swung wildly around the room before landing on the small stage where a microphone stand had been set up. The feedback whine pierced the air, making Grandma wince in her wheelchair. Testing, testing, hello everyone. Evelyn's voice boomed through the speakers. She was beaming, the picture of success, holding a glass of champagne high. Thank you all for coming to this incredibly special day, she cooed. Not only are we celebrating the matriarch of our family, Grandma, we love you, but we are celebrating the launch of a dream, my dream. She didn't even look at Grandma. She motioned to the banner behind her. Evie's essence is about purity, it's about luxury, it's about living your best life. And to help me launch this, I have my amazing support system here. My parents. Martha and Dad stepped into the spotlight. Martha was beaming, tears in her eyes. Dad looked like he was about to vomit. And, Evelyn continued, her eyes scanning the crowd until they locked onto me. A predatory smile curled her lips. I want to invite my big sister, Rebecca, to come up here. Rebecca has been, well, she's been working so hard in her little cubicle, but she told me she wanted to make a special contribution to the launch today. A seed investment to show her belief in me. The room applauded politely. My stomach dropped. She was ambushing me. She was banking on the social pressure to force my hand. If I refused now, in front of everyone, I would look like a monster. I didn't move. Rebecca, Evelyn laughed, a tinkling, fake sound. Don't be shy, come on up and present the check. Mom said you had it ready. The spotlight swung to me. I was blinded for a second, blinking against the glare. The silence in the room stretched. Everyone was staring. Martha was making frantic, come here gestures with her hands. I took a breath. I walked slowly toward the stage. As I climbed the 3 steps, Evelyn whispered, away from the mic, "Smile, you miserable cow. Everyone is watching." I took the microphone from her hand. I didn't smile. "Hi, everyone," I said, my voice steady, practiced from years of presenting data to aggressive hedge fund managers. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Evelyn's smile faltered. "What?" "I'm here to celebrate Grandma," I said, turning to the wheelchair in the corner. "Happy birthday, Grandma." I turned back to the crowd. As for the business, I think it's important to be transparent in business, isn't it, Evelyn? "Give me the mic," Evelyn hissed, reaching for it. I stepped back. "There is no check," I said clearly. "I am not investing in Evie's essence." A ripple of shock went through the room. It was quiet enough to hear the hum of the air conditioning. "Rebecca, stop this," Martha shouted from behind me, stepping forward. "You're tired, you don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," I said, looking my mother in the eye. "I know you told Evelyn I would pay. I know you view my bank account as an extension of yours, but I am not funding a business that has no business plan, no revenue, and is built on debt." "Debt?" Evelyn screeched, grabbing my arm. "You're lying, you're just jealous. You're jealous because I'm building an empire and you're a nobody." I pulled my arm away. "It's not an empire, Evelyn. It's a sinkhole. I know about the second mortgage, Mom." The color drained from Martha's face so fast she looked like a ghost. My father made a choking sound and sat down heavily on the edge of the stage. I know you took out $150,000 against the house, I continued, my voice calm but projecting to the back of the room. I know you spent it all, and I know you're broke. That's why you needed my $5,000 today, not for a deposit, but to pay the caterer so they wouldn't pack up the food. The silence now was heavy, suffocating. The investors and influencers were exchanging awkward glances. Some were already reaching for their bags. Evelyn looked around, panic rising in her eyes. Her narrative was cracking. She did the only thing she knew how to do. She attacked. "You are such a liar," she screamed, her face twisting into something ugly. "You're just trying to sabotage me. You've always hated me because I'm special and you're nothing. You're a boring, ugly, lonely workaholic who lives in a dump." She grabbed the microphone stand, tilting it aggressively. "Mom, tell them she's lying. Tell them we're rich." Martha stepped up, trembling with rage. "Get off the stage, Rebecca. You are a spiteful, jealous child. We have supported you, we have loved you, and this is how you repay us. By trying to humiliate your sister." "I'm not trying to humiliate her," I said. "I'm trying to stop you from enabling her until you're homeless. But you won't listen." "Get out," Evelyn shrieked. "Get out of my launch, you're not welcome here. Go back to your sad little life and your sad little apartment." I walked off the stage, the adrenaline thumping in my ears. I hadn't planned to expose the mortgage so publicly, but the ambush left me no choice. I walked straight toward the exit, intending to leave. But Martha wasn't done. She chased after me, grabbing my shoulder with a grip that was surprisingly strong. She spun me around near the entrance to the kitchen, away from the main crowd but still visible. "You ungrateful little brat," she spat, her face inches from mine. Veins were bulging in her neck. "Do you have any idea what you just did? You scared off the investors." "There were no investors, Mom," I snapped, my patience finally incinerated. "Those people are Evelyn's friends. They weren't going to give you money. They were here for the free champagne that you paid for with a loan you can't afford." "We can afford it," she insisted, though her eyes darted nervously. "Evelyn is going to be huge. We just needed a bridge loan. And you have money, we know you do, you just sit on it. Why, to punish us?" "Because I earned it," I said. "I worked for it while you were buying Evelyn modeling classes. I saved it while you were paying her bail. It's my money." "It's family money," Martha cried out. "We are a family. When one of us succeeds, we all succeed. But you don't want that. You want us to fail so you can feel superior with your spreadsheets and your little queen's studio." Evelyn came storming up behind her, tears streaming down her face, ruining her spray tan. She looked deranged. "You ruined my life," Evelyn screamed. "I was going to sign 3 contracts today, and you ruined it with your lies." "They aren't lies, Evelyn. Ask Dad." I pointed to our father, who was still sitting on the stage, head in his hands. "I don't care what Dad says," Evelyn yelled. "You're just jealous. You've always been jealous. That's why you're alone. That's why you have no boyfriend, no life, no style. You're just a worker bee. You exist to serve people like me, people with vision." She poked me hard in the chest. "You think you're so smart because you saved a few pennies?" Evelyn laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "You're pathetic. You live in a roach motel. I'm going to be a star. And when I am, I'm going to buy the building you live in and evict you." I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. She was standing there, in a dress bought with debt, at a party paid for with a mortgage, mocking my financial status. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a cold, absolute clarity. I had been protecting them from the truth of my success because I didn't want them to feel bad. I didn't want to overshadow Evelyn. I wanted to be humble. But humility had only earned me abuse. They didn't mistake my silence for modesty. They mistook it for weakness. I reached into my clutch. My fingers brushed the cool paper of the deed. "You think I live in a roach motel?" I asked quietly. "I know you do," Evelyn sneered. "Mom saw it yesterday. It smells like curry and despair. That's who you are, Rebecca, you're small. And you think you're going to buy my building? I asked, a small, dangerous smile touching my lips. Maybe I will, Evelyn flipped her hair, just to teach you a lesson. Well, I said, pulling the envelope out, you might have a hard time with that. What is that? Martha asked, eyeing the thick cream paper. Another bill you want us to pay? No, I said, it's a closing statement. I opened the envelope. I could feel the eyes of the guests on us. The argument had drawn a crowd. Uncle Rob had moved closer, crossing his arms, watching with intense interest. You see, Evelyn, I said, my voice raising just enough to carry. I don't work in data entry. I'm a senior quantitative analyst. I run algorithms for high-frequency trading. My base salary is $400,000 a year. My bonus last year was $2 million. Evelyn's mouth fell open. Martha blinked, looking like she had been slapped. I don't live in that studio in Queens anymore, I continued, taking a step toward them. I moved out this morning, and I didn't rent a new place. I held up the deed. I bought the penthouse at the Obsidian in Tribeca. Cash, $6.5 million. The room went dead silent. The Obsidian was one of the most famous buildings in the city. Everyone knew it. So, I said, looking Evelyn dead in the eye, you're not going to evict me. In fact, looking at your financials, I could buy you, and I wouldn't even have to dip into my savings. Evelyn stared at me, her brain trying to process the shift in power. Her face turned a violent shade of red. She was holding her glass of red wine, her knuckles white. You're lying, she whispered, her voice trembling. Am I? I unlocked my phone and held up the screen. It was a photo of me standing on my new private terrace, the Manhattan skyline sprawling behind me, keys in hand. The evidence was undeniable. The poor relation was the richest person in the room. The failure was a multimillionaire. And that was when Evelyn broke. The moment stretched, suspended in a suffocating silence that felt like the air before a thunderstorm. Evelyn's face had gone from red to a terrifying, mottled purple. Her world, the carefully constructed delusion where she was the queen and I was the serf, had just been obliterated by a single piece of paper and a photograph on a screen. She looked at the image of the penthouse, then at me, then at the guests, who were now whispering feverishly. The humiliation was total. For a narcissist like Evelyn, this wasn't just a correction, it was a psychic death. You, she choked out, her voice strangulated. You stole this, you stole our money. It's my salary, Evelyn, I said calmly, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. It's my bonus. I didn't steal a cent from this family, unlike you. That was the spark. Evelyn screamed, a primal, incoherent shriek of rage. Her arm whipped forward. I saw the arc of the red wine leaving the glass in slow motion. It was a dark, liquid ribbon flying through the air. I didn't flinch. I didn't duck. I just stood there and let it hit me. The cold liquid splashed across the front of my black silk jumpsuit, soaking into the fabric, dripping down my chest like a wound. A few drops splattered onto my face. The glass itself tumbled from her hand and shattered on the floor, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the quiet room. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Someone shouted, "Oh my God!" Phones were instantly raised, capturing the scene. The influencers Evelyn had courted were now documenting her demise. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the stain. Then I looked up at her. I wiped a droplet of wine from my cheek with a slow, deliberate movement. That, I said, my voice low and dangerous, was a mistake. It's not fair, Evelyn howled, stomping her foot like a toddler. It's not fair, you're supposed to be the loser. Mom, Dad, she's lying, make her give it to me. That money belongs to the family. She owes us. Martha had collapsed into a chair, sobbing into her hands. Not because her eldest daughter had just been assaulted, but because the illusion was gone. Evelyn, stop, please, she moaned. The guests. Forget the guests, Evelyn screamed, spinning on her mother. Look at her, she's mocking us. She's sitting on millions while we lose the house. She's evil. She lunged toward me, her hands curled into claws. But she never reached me. A heavy hand clamped onto her shoulder, jerking her back with effortless force. It was Uncle Rob. He had moved with a speed that belied his age. He spun Evelyn around and planted himself between us, a wall of flannel and granite. "That is enough," Rob roared, his voice booming over the sound of Evelyn's hysterics and the murmuring crowd. The room instantly went dead silent. Rob looked at Evelyn, who was panting, her eyes wild. Then he looked at Martha, weeping in the chair. Finally, he looked at my father, who was still sitting on the edge of the stage, staring at the floor as if he wished it would open up and swallow him. Rob shook his head, a gesture of profound disappointment. He looked at me, covered in wine, standing tall, holding the deed to a life they couldn't even comprehend, and then he looked back at my parents. "Well," Rob said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife, loud enough for every single person in the back of the room to hear. "I guess we backed the wrong kid." The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. "Rob, don't," Martha wailed, looking up with mascara running down her face. "Don't say that." "I'm saying it, Martha," Rob snapped. "For 20 years, I've watched you treat Rebecca like a servant and Evelyn like a princess. I watched you bleed your savings dry for a pipe dream while Rebecca quietly built a damn empire. And now you're broke, you're about to be homeless, and the daughter you spit on is the only one standing on her own 2 feet." He turned to the crowd, his face grim. "Party S over, folks. Go home, there's no launch, there's no company, there's just a mess." The guests didn't need to be told twice. The room dissolved into chaos. People were grabbing their purses and hurrying toward the exits, whispering excitedly. I saw Liv, one of the influencers Evelyn worshipped, recording a selfie video as she walked out, saying, "You guys are not going to believe the tea I have from this launch party." Evelyn saw it too. She ran toward them. "No, stop, don't post that, I'll sue you, come back." She was ignored. She was irrelevant. I looked at my parents. My father finally looked up, meeting my eyes. There was shock there, yes, but also a dawning, terrible realization of his own failure. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to beg. I didn't give him the chance. I walked over to Grandma. She was looking around with wide, frightened eyes, clutching her purse. "I'm sorry, Grandma," I said gently, kneeling beside her wheelchair, ignoring the wine soaking my clothes. "I'm sorry your party got ruined." She reached out and touched my face, her hand trembling. "You bought a house, Becca." "I did, Grandma, a beautiful one." "Good," she whispered, a sudden clarity in her eyes. "Good for you, don't let them take it." I kissed her hand, then I stood up and turned to the door. "Rebecca," Martha shouted, scrambling out of her chair. She ran toward me. Desperation etched into every line of her face. "Rebecca, wait, you can't just leave, we need to talk, we need to figure this out." I stopped and turned. "There is nothing to figure out." "The house," she sobbed, grabbing at my arm, though she recoiled when she touched the wet wine stain. "We're going to lose the house next month, they'll foreclose, you have millions. You could write a check right now and save us, please, for the family." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had called me selfish for being sick. I looked at the woman who had demanded I pay for a party while I was undergoing heart tests. "I tried to help you," I said softly. "For years, I fixed the roof. I paid the bills. I sent money when Dad lost his job, and you took it all and gave it to Evelyn. You gambled on the wrong horse, Mom, and now the race is over." "Rebecca, please," she shrieked, falling to her knees. It was a pathetic, theatrical display, but I felt nothing. The emotional cord had been severed days ago. "We're your parents, you owe us." "I don't owe you a thing," I said. "I paid my debts in invisible labor and silence for 29 years. We're square." I looked over her head at Evelyn, who was standing alone in the middle of the empty dance floor, sobbing into her hands. "Evelyn wants to be a boss," I said. "Let her figure it out. She's the brand, right?" I turned and walked out the double doors, into the cool afternoon air. I didn't look back. Behind me, I could hear my mother screaming my name, but the sound was fading, drowned out by the rushing of the blood in my ears and the sound of my own freedom. 3 months later. The sun was setting over the Hudson River, casting a long, golden fire across the water. I sat on my terrace, wrapped in a cashmere throw, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. The air up here was different, cleaner, thinner, quieter. The Obsidian was a fortress. The doormen were polite and impenetrable. The elevator required a key fob that only I possessed. It was the first place in my entire life where I felt truly, completely safe. I took a sip of tea and looked at the tablet resting on my lap. The screen displayed a final report from the lawyer I had hired the Monday after the party. It was done. The foreclosure on my parents' house had gone through. They hadn't been able to refinance, their credit was destroyed, and with the Evie's essence, fraud exposed, no bank would touch them. They had been forced to downsize into a 2-bedroom rental apartment in a less desirable part of town. It was harsh, it was brutal, but it was the consequence of their own mathematics. The buzzer at my door rang. I checked the video monitor. It was Uncle Rob. I buzzed him up. A few minutes later, he walked onto the terrace, holding a brown paper bag. He looked around, whistling low. "I gotta say, kid," he said, walking to the edge of the railing and looking down at the city. "You really didn't mess around. This view is worth every penny." "It helps me think," I said, gesturing for him to sit. "Beer." "Please." I went to the outdoor fridge and handed him a cold bottle. He sat down on the patio sofa, groaning slightly as he settled in. "So," he said, cracking the bottle, "I just came from their place." I stiffened slightly. "How are they?" "Miserable," Rob said bluntly. "Your dad is working part-time at a hardware store. Martha is, well, she's Martha. She spends all day complaining about the apartment, the neighbors, the noise. She still blames you, says you abandoned them." "I expected that," I said, watching a barge move slowly down the river. "And Evelyn." Rob chuckled darkly. "That's the best part. After the video of her meltdown went viral, thank you, Internet, she couldn't show her face in the influencer scene. She tried to pivot to victim content, crying about how her mean billionaire sister cut her off, but the comments section ate her alive. People found the public records. They saw the mortgage. They saw the fraud." "So what is she doing?" "She's working," Rob said, taking a swig of beer. "Receptionist at a dental office. 9 to 5. She hates it, complains every second of every day, but she's paying rent." I felt a knot in my chest loosen. "Good." "They ask about you," Rob said, his voice softening. "Your dad asked if I had your number. He wanted to call." "Did you give it to him?" "Nope," Rob said. "I told him you'd reach out if and when you were ready. I told him you needed time, a lot of time." I looked at my uncle, the one man who had stood up for me when it mattered. "Thank you, Rob, for everything." "I should have stepped in sooner," he said, looking at his hands. "I let it go on too long. I'm sorry for that, Becca." "You stepped in when the wine started flying," I smiled. "That counts." He reached into the paper bag he had brought. "Oh, almost forgot. I salvaged this from the house before the bank took the keys. Thaug. HT, you might want it." He pulled out an old, tattered photo album. It was from before Evelyn was born. I opened it. There were pictures of me as a toddler, sitting on my dad's shoulders, both of us smiling. Pictures of me baking with Grandma. "There was love there once," Rob said quietly, "before the greed got in the way. Don't forget that part. It doesn't excuse what they did, but it's okay to remember the good parts too." I ran my fingers over the plastic cover. Tears pricked my eyes, but they weren't the painful, jagged tears of the past. They were softer. Tears of mourning for a family that had died a long time ago. "I'm paying for Grandma's care facility," I told him. "I called the home yesterday. I set up a direct debit. She won't have to worry about anything. I'm going to visit her on Sunday." "She'll like that," Rob said. "She's proud of you, we all are, the ones who matter anyway." We sat in silence for a while, watching the city sparkle. I thought about my parents in their cramped rental, blaming the world for their misfortune. I thought about Evelyn, answering phones and learning the hard reality of $1. I had lost them, but in losing them, I had found myself. I looked around my terrace. This wasn't just a penthouse. It was a sanctuary. It was proof that I could survive, that I could thrive, and that I didn't need their permission to exist. I raised my teacup to the city. To the wrong kid, I whispered. Rob raised his beer, clinking it against my cup. To the right kid. I took a sip, the warmth spreading through my chest. The migraine was gone. The heart palpitations had stopped weeks ago. For the first time in 29 years, the silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. And I was finally, truly free.